June 4th, 1942. Midway Atoll, Pacific Ocean. The sun rises over the endless blue horizon, its light glinting off the steel decks of carriers and the salt-stained canopies of aircraft waiting for orders. Inside the cockpit of a brand new Grumman TBF Avenger, Ensign Albert Ernest wipes condensation from his instruments. The Avenger is heavy, lumbering, its wings broad like a predator bird. But to May in the Navy, it feels more like a clumsy beast than a sleep killer. The Avenger had only just entered service weeks earlier. Its fuselage was larger than the aging Douglas TBD Devastator, its radial engine rumbling with raw power, but its bulk made it slow to maneuver. Japanese commanders, confident in their nimble Mitsubishi A6M fighters, mocked the Avengers little more than a flying coffin. "Too heavy, too slow," they sneered. "It will never reach our ships." Yet on this morning, Ernest and his crew are strapped in, ready to prove otherwise. The air smells of oil and salt. The deck crew signals. Engines roar, the Avenger lurches forward, its wheels rattling across the carrier deck before lifting into the sky. Above the Pacific, formations of American aircraft climb into the clouds, dauntless dive bombers, Wildcats, and the new Avengers. Their mission, intercept the Japanese fleet advancing toward Midway. 4 carriers, Akagi, Kuga, Soryu, and Hiryu, steam forward, bristling with aircraft and guarded by cruisers and destroyers. The Japanese commanders believe their strike force is invincible, but the Americans have cracked their codes. Admiral Chester Nimitz knows where they are, and now the Avengers are flying straight into history. The Pacific wind buffets the canopy. Ernest grips the controls. His gunner Harry Ferrier scans the horizon nervously. Below them, the ocean stretches like a mirror, waiting to swallow men and machines alike. The Battle of Midway has begun. The Avengers drone forward, their engines straining against the humid air. At 10,000 feet, the formation spots the Japanese fleet, tiny specks at first, then growing into the unmistakable silhouettes of carriers and cruisers cutting through the waves. "Targets in sight," Ernest mutters, his voice steady but tight. The Japanese lookouts spot them almost instantly. Sirens wail across the decks of Akagi and Kuga. Anti-aircraft guns swivel skyward, their barrels glinting in the sun. Within seconds, the sky erupts in black puffs of flak. The Avengers dive lower, heavy and deliberate. Their torpedoes hang beneath their bellies, each one a steel promise of destruction. But the Japanese Zero fighters are already climbing to intercept. The first Avenger is shredded by cannon fire, its wings snapping off before plunging into the sea. Another burst into flames, spiraling downward. Ernest Avenger shakes violently as tracers whip past the canopy. Ferrier fires back with the rear gun, his hands trembling as he squeezes the trigger. "Hold her, Spatty," Ferrier shouts. Ernest grits his teeth. The Avenger is slower than the Zero, but it is tough. Its armor plating absorbs punishment that would tear lighter planes apart. He pushes lower, skimming the waves, lining up the Japanese cruiser Mikuma in his sights. The torpedo release lever clicks. The weapon drops, slicing into the ocean, leaving a white trail as it speeds toward the ship. Seconds later, a thunderous explosion erupts against Mikuma's hull. Water and steel leap skyward. The cruiser shudders, smoke pouring from its side. Japanese commanders watching from their bridges are stunned. The clumsy Avenger has struck. But the cost is brutal. Out of 6 Avengers launched from Midway that morning, only Ernest limps back, riddled with holes, hydraulics failing, Ferrier wounded. The others are gone, burned, drowned, swallowed by the Pacific. Yet the message is clear. The Avenger can deliver.
By midday, the battle rages across the sky. Waves of American aircraft hammer the Japanese carriers. Dive bombers scream downward, their sirens wailing, releasing bombs that smash into decks loaded with fuel and munitions. The Avengers, though mauled, continue their runs. Each torpedo dropped forces Japanese captains to swerve violently, disrupting formations and slowing their advance. The lumbering planes, mocked as obsolete before they even flew, are now reshaping the battle. On the bridge of Akagi, Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo watches in disbelief. His fleet had crushed Pearl Harbor only 6 months earlier. His pilots had laughed at American aircraft, calling them inferior toys. But now, his carriers are burning. Kaga erupts in flames. Soryu buckles under explosions. Hiryu fights desperately, launching counterstrikes. But by evening, she too is ablaze. 4 carriers, Japan's striking arm, are gone. The Avengers did not sink them alone, but they played their part. Their torpedoes crippled cruisers, forced evasive maneuvers, and kept Japanese defenses stretched thin. What was mocked as clumsy became a weapon of attrition, grinding down the fleet until the dive bombers could deliver the killing blows. For the Japanese commanders, the laughter dies. The Avenger is no joke. It is a symbol of America's relentless adaptation, an aircraft that, despite flaws, could endure punishment and strike back with devastating effect. As night falls over Midway, the Pacific glows with burning oil and shattered steel. Survivors cling to rafts. The tide of war has turned. In the months after Midway, the Grumman TBF Avenger becomes a cornerstone of U.S. naval aviation. Pilots learn to respect its toughness, its ability to carry heavy payloads, and its resilience under fire. By 1933, Avengers are flying from carriers across the Pacific, hunting submarines, striking convoys, and crippling Japanese supply lines. Future President George W.H. Bush would fly an Avenger in combat. Thousands more would serve until the end of the war, their hulking frames a constant reminder of Midway's lesson: never underestimate an enemy's capacity to adapt. For the Japanese, Midway is the beginning of the end. The loss of 4 carriers cripples their naval air power, a blow from which they never recover. And in the wreckage of that battle lies the irony. The aircraft they mocked helped deliver the strike that doomed them. The Avenger, once ridiculed, became a legend. The Pacific War would rage for 3 more years, but the tide had shifted. And it shifted, in part, because of a plane that proved laughter could turn to silence in the space of a single battle.
June 7th, 1942. The smoke still hangs over the Pacific like a funeral shroud. Oil slicks stretch for miles, shimmering in the sunlight, marking the graves of carriers that once symbolized Japan's naval supremacy. Survivors cling to rafts, their faces blackened with soot, their uniforms torn by fire and salt water. On the American side, the mood is somber but resolute. Pilots stagger back to their carriers, some wounded, some silent, all changed. Ensign Albert Ernest's Avenger limps home, riddled with bullet holes, hydraulics leaking, his gunner Ferrier barely conscious. The crew knows they are among the few who survived the torpedo runs. Out of the 6 Avengers launched from Midway that morning, only 1 returned. Yet their sacrifice was not in vain. The Japanese fleet, once thought unstoppable, has been crippled. 4 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu lie beneath the waves. The laughter of Japanese commanders who mocked the Avenger as clumsy and useless has turned to silence. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of Pearl Harbor, receives the grim reports. His strike force, the pride of the Imperial Navy, is shattered. He realizes what his officers cannot yet admit. Japan has lost the initiative. The war that began with triumph at Pearl Harbor now tilts toward disaster. For the Americans, Midway is more than a victory. It is a turning point. The Avenger, though bloodied and imperfect, has proven its worth. Its toughness, its payload, and its resilience under fire will make it a cornerstone of U.S. naval aviation. The Pacific War will rage on. Guadalcanal, Leyte Gulf,
Iwo Jima, but the tide has shifted, and it shifted in part because of a plane that carried the weight of doubt, ridicule, and sacrifice and turned it into a weapon of history. The Grumman TBF Avenger, once mocked, now flies into legend. Summer 1942. Across the Pacific, word spreads quickly. In Tokyo, the Imperial General Headquarters struggles to explain the loss of 4 carriers to a stunned public. Newspapers print carefully censored accounts, but whispers among officers and civilians alike reveal the truth. Japan's naval air arm has been gutted. On the American side, the mood is different. In Pearl Harbor, sailors gather around radios, listening to reports of the victory. For men who had seen their battleships burning in December 1941, Midway feels like redemption. The Avenger, once doubted, is now spoken of with respect. Pilots recall its toughness, its ability to absorb punishment, and its role in forcing Japanese ships into chaos. In Washington, President Franklin D. Roosevelt receives the news with quiet satisfaction. The United States has proven it can stand toe-to-toe with Japan's vaunted fleet. Admiral Nimitz, calm and deliberate, reminds his staff that Midway is not the end, it is the beginning of a long, grinding campaign. But morale has shifted. The myth of Japanese invincibility is broken. For the Japanese commanders, the laughter at the Avenger is now a bitter memory. They had mocked the plane's bulk, its slow speed, its ungainly frame, yet it was part of the storm that sinked their carriers and shattered their confidence. The Avenger's name itself becomes symbolic, an omen of America's resolve to strike back. In the months that follow, Avengers fly from carriers across the Pacific. They hunt submarines, patrol convoys, and deliver torpedoes against enemy shipping. Their crews, hardened by Midway, know the risks but also the rewards. Each mission carries the weight of sacrifice, but also the promise of victory. The Pacific War will stretch on for 3 more years, but Midway remains the fulcrum. And in its echoes lies a lesson. Never underestimate an enemy's capacity to adapt, to endure, and to strike back with weapons once dismissed as failures. The Avenger, mocked at birth, became a legend at Midway.
1943 to 1945. The Pacific War grinds forward, island by island, battle by battle. The Grumman TBF Avenger, once ridiculed, now becomes a familiar silhouette in the skies above Tarawa, the Philippine Sea, and Okinawa. Its deep fuselage carries not only torpedoes, but bombs, depth charges, and radar equipment, making it one of the most versatile aircraft of the war. Pilots who once doubted its bulk now praise its resilience. Stories circulate of Avengers limping back to carriers with shredded wings, engines coughing smoke, yet still managing to land. Crews speak of its ability to absorb punishment that would have destroyed lighter planes. For many, the Avenger becomes a symbol of endurance, an aircraft that mirrors the determination of the men who fly it. Japanese commanders, meanwhile, watch their fleets dwindle. Each new engagement brings more losses, more ships crippled by American air power. The Avenger is part of that relentless tide. By 1944, Avengers are hunting submarines in the Philippine Sea, striking convoys in the East China Sea, and patrolling vast stretches of ocean. Their presence is constant, their impact undeniable. In the closing months of the war, the Avenger's reputation is sealed. It is no longer mocked as clumsy or slow. It is respected as a workhorse, a machine that carried America's naval aviation through some of its darkest and most decisive battles. And when the war finally ends in August 1945, the Avenger stands as more than just an aircraft. It is a reminder of Midway,
the moment that laughter turned to silence, when doubt turned to legend, and when the tide of war began to shift irreversibly. The Avengers' legacy endures, not in the sleekness of its design, but in the resilience of its spirit. 1946. The war is over. Across the Pacific, silence replaces the thunder of guns and the roar of engines. On airfields from Guam to Okinawa, Avengers sit idle, their paint scarred, their fuselages patched, and their propellers still. Some will be scrapped, others sold, a few preserved. Yet for the men who flew them, the memories remain vivid. Pilots recall the laughter of Japanese commanders who once dismissed the Avenger as clumsy. They remember the terror of flying low against walls of flak, the sting of tracer rounds ripping through the canopy, the smell of burning oil as comrades fell into the sea. They remember Midway, the day the Avenger proved its worth. In museums decades later, visitors stand before the hulking frame of a preserved Avenger. Its wings stretch wide, its fuselage heavy, its cockpit cramped. Guides tell the story, how this ungainly plane helped turn the tide of the Pacific War. Children peer inside, imagining the courage it took to fly such a machine into battle. For historians, the Avenger is more than an aircraft. It is a symbol of adaptation, of resilience, of the way America transformed ridicule into respect. It embodies the lesson of Midway, that war is not won by sleekness alone, but by endurance, sacrifice, and the will to keep fighting even when mocked. The Japanese commanders who once laughed at the Avenger lived to see their empire collapse. The Avenger, meanwhile, lived on, not just in steel and rivets, but in memory, in legacy, in the enduring truth that sometimes the most underestimated weapon becomes the most decisive. The Pacific is calm now. The carriers are gone, the fleets dismantled. But in the echoes of Midway, the Avenger still flies, slow, heavy, relentless, and unforgettable.